Let's start with the Holy Grail. I think what everyone in Web3 is trying to achieve right now is one-click onboarding on mobile with no gas, right?
Hello, James. Quickly introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
Hey, everyone. I'm James Bourque. I am the co-founder and co-CEO of intu.xyz. We are building next-generation infrastructure for all of Web3, starting with accounts. We're making user experiences better through true infrastructure.
Awesome. Great. So I've got a few questions on the topic of on user onboarding customization and Web3, and because Intu is so in-depth into making that process easier and making it almost like Web2 onboarding for users in Web3, why is customization so crucial for user onboarding in the Web3 space, in your opinion?
So, I mean, there's two parts to that, right? The first one, just focusing on the customization bit. The reality is that Web3 is so new that the average user, the average mainstream person, when they're getting started in Web3, they don't know what to expect, right? And so unlike Web2 that we take for granted, unlike the things that we've been doing for the past 20 years, with Web3, there really needs to be a lot of hand-holding, right? I need to be able to guide you to the result that I want, right? Whether that's DeFi, whether that's an NFT, whether that's spinning up a Web3 enabled game, right? I need to help you get there. And at this, current point in time, most of Web3, just because of the way that things are evolving, we have these general purpose, one size fits all user experiences. And not only that, but they're not great user experiences, right? They assume a lot of prior knowledge. Even if it's easy to do, it assumes that you know what you are doing. And so those two things really make customization all that much more important, because the average mainstream user, when they're getting started, they don't know what they're supposed to know coming to that point in time when they're getting started. And they also aren't fully clear as to how it works and where they're going. And so the customization bit really comes, I mean, first and foremost, for user experience, it comes to handholding, right? I'm going to guide you to this. The second part of it is more about safety and security, right? And it's about meeting the expectations for safety and security in Web3. The reality is the amount of sophistication that you'd want to put around something like holding digital assets in the, whether it's $10,000 or $100,000 worth or more, right? That needs to be substantially more sophisticated. And you have to teach your end user to be more sophisticated than if you're just collecting a friend's NFT, right? Someone that, I don't know, took a photograph and then minted it, whatever, right? If they lose the NFT, that's not great, but it's not the deed to your house, right? There's those two sides of it. And right now, outside of just the user experience part, there's also this safety and security part. And we need to start customizing these accounts and these user experiences to match the severity of what it is that's associated with that account. Corporations take much more care of their business email accounts than an individual might of their personal. I think that pretty much covers it. Did we talk about traditional Web2 onboarding as well, or is that?
Yeah, I was about to ask, and how does that differ from the traditional Web2 onboarding? Because we're all familiar already with how do I get a Google account? How do I sign into a new SaaS that I just want to get into? Because it's just 2 clicks, I get in, and it's like that, because log in through my Facebook, through my Google, or just give them my email and password. While with Web3, it's so much more complex, because exactly why and how can we make it better with Intu?
Well, the why is easy, right? The why is because Web3, we try to do something that was fundamentally different, right? In Web2, everything is provided to you, right? You have a device. That device gets an IP address. Someone is giving you that IP address. And once you're connected to the internet, you need to somehow identify yourself to the network. So somebody gives you an email, right? You go to Google and you say, I want a new Gmail account. You put in, whatever you want that to be. You set a password. hopefully you set up some sort of two-factor authentication, but then you kind of go out into the world, right? And it's, hey, I am James at intu.xyz, and this is, all of what took for me to get there was provided to me. With that in mind, right, the kind of one of the major driving factors of Web3 was that early Web3 builders weren't comfortable with that, right? I should be able to define who I am on these networks. I should be able to create my own IP address. I should be able to create my own email address, right? In reality. So in the beginning, to connect and interact with Web3, you had to run your own node, right? You're down here at the consensus level, and you're actually providing infrastructure and supporting the network directly. That also meant that you had to manage your own private keys, which was super, super complicated, and the user experience was too much for most people. So what we did was we invented wallets, right? This was software that handled the two complicated bits for you, the key management and then broadcasting that transaction for you. So if it's MetaMask plus Infura, voila. So you've now moved users from the baseline to more of a transportation communication layer where it's being handled for you, but at the end of the day, it's still self-sovereign. What Web3 is starting to do, which in my opinion is not fantastic, is we're actually pushing another layer further away from the safety of the blockchain. And we're getting into account abstraction, right? And so account abstraction from a user experience point of view is incredibly important. But the reality is that the safety of it and the fragility of it, because you're getting away from the foundation of this house, starts becoming paramount, right? We have to reinforce that. You can't just build up, you need to build with, right? Every layer. The unfortunate reality of where we are today when it comes to like traditional web onboarding is that we're really pushing towards imitating those onboarding experiences. I want to be able to use my Apple ID so I can use the biometrics on my phone to create a Web3 account. Fantastic. We've been able to make really, really attractive 30-second videos demonstrating how this works. But the reality is when you look underneath it, right, it's a house of cards. It's standing on something very thin. And if you start poking these little cards, the whole thing comes collapsing. So it's very reminiscent of like the early 90s of the internet, right? We wanted to do these things, but we couldn't. And this is where Intu comes in. We need the infrastructure to support that. It's not enough to imitate, right? Like I can stream audio to my computer, but in 1995, the radio was still a better experience. So even though I could listen to I could listen to audio on both. I didn't need this. The streaming audio didn't provide added value relative to radio with a cassette recorder, right? It was the same. So kind of looking at traditional Web2 onboarding, that is what people are accustomed to. That is what people expect. That makes their lives a whole lot easier. But we can't just stop there. We need to actually innovate beyond that, right? Whether it's something that's tangible like Face ID, or if it's something that the end user doesn't see but can maybe feel the repercussions of, which is Face ID plus decentralized infrastructure. And hopefully eventually that innovation, that'll be the foundation for further innovations that make identifying yourself to digital networks that much easier.
You mentioned adding an additional layer, moving us more away from the core blockchain in order to add more security. And what exactly is Intu's technology doing to either counteract it or to work towards that direction as well?
So when we set out to build Intu, it was fundamental to us to not compromise on what made Web3 different. I know that a lot of people, right, will still talk about, well, what is the why of Web3? You go to a mainstream user and they'll say, why? Right? I have email, I have my online banking, I can send you money on PayPal or Venmo. Like, why? Why is this better? If you talk to the crypto OGs, the fundamental why was, it's the same, but now I have control. Now I have choice. And this is something that cannot be taken from me. As a human being who lives a majority of their life in a digital environment, I should have rights, right? I should have some privileges that cannot be taken from me. And that was really the original why. of Web3. And I think sometimes people forget that, right? That anything without that is just a very expensive Web2. And so where Intu comes in, really with that in mind, we made sure that we were able to achieve things like shared ownership, things like account recovery, things like customizable security concerns, but do it in a way that was fundamental, something that was backwards compatible, something that really came in at the infrastructure layer, so that we could support these experiences that we know that people want, right, for safe mainstream adoption without compromising on the why. Right? Because, like I said with the radio, yes, it sounds the same, feels the same, but if in reality it's not, then in reality it's not better. It's more expensive, it's more tedious, it's more cumbersome. So Intu's infrastructure, right? We interact with the consensus layer. Like as far as the network is concerned, we are a normal externally owned account. It has the same feeling to it. It has the same protections and the same compatibility characteristics that you would expect from an account. But now, because of the way we've built Intu, you can support these other experiences, right? We can provide developers with the tools that they need to better meet human expectations. I'm a human being, I should be able to lose my password. I'm a human being, I should be able to reset my password. I should be able to share ownership of my digital assets with people that I trust. And doing all of that without compromising on the why of Web3.
Sounds like a good dream to work towards. Could you walk us through Intu's approach to customization and what sets it apart from other solutions?
Right. Well, so there's two sides to this, and I'll be forthcoming in being transparent that it's also something that we're actively developing as things come up. The reality is that the biggest, all of the other things aside, the biggest innovation that we at Intu have been able to put together is a static account, right? My address doesn't change, my identity to the network doesn't change, it's static, but now the private key is dynamic. So for the uninitiated, the result is static address, and then you have key shares that can be assigned to just about any factors that you want. They can behave in different ways. So this empowers kind of two different trajectories. The first is for the interfaces. I can now customize, right? I have more flexibility in how I create accounts, more flexibility in the custody models, right? I can now offer things like customer service. Right? I can provide my end users with the majority of the ownership of the account so much that I can't do anything without their participation. But in the event that they lose part of that ownership, they lose part of these shares, part of that threshold, I can now step in and say, hey, I will help you reset your password. You can maintain the longevity of that account for longer. On the other side, it's really about innovation, right? And it's what can we achieve now that private keys, now that credentials, right? Now that your password can change and evolve over time. So for an end user, right, that means that I can now transfer ownership, not of just assets, but of my entire portfolio, my entire existence, right? I'm playing a Web3 enabled game. I have super cool gear, but I'm done playing this game. I'm going to transfer all of that work that I put into this game to someone else, right? And then they can verifiably be the only remaining owner of those game assets, right? I've now transferred the account. The other bit is stuff like proactive security, right? So we're putting all of this important information on the blockchain, right? California is piloting the deed to your car on the blockchain. But if you lose that one private key, it's gone, right? I just lost the deed to the title to my car, right? So if we're really talking about digitally unique assets, right? What NFTs were originally before they were non-fungible tokens, which is something every man on the street now apparently knows. The idea was that this is a digitally unique piece of data. It might resemble other things, but I can verifiably say this is the only one, right? This is a dollar bill with Obama's signature on it. suddenly unique. If I want to get real lifetime value out of that, I need to be able to proactively secure that account. I need to be able to change the credentials that identify myself to whatever's holding that asset. A great example for this would be something like IoT, right? Or even at some levels, AI, right? I need to maintain a static address for all the devices that are on this network, all the devices that make up this network, but I need them to natively connect to Web3 because we're using Web3 for monetization. We're using Web3 for data storage. We're using Web3 for liquidity, whatever it might be. In order to do that safely, you need to maintain that static address. But as anyone that's maintained any sort of network will tell you, you have to frequently rotate credentials. Even your home router will reassign IP addresses on a regular basis, right? Reassign cookies, reassign authorizations. You just simply can't do that without Intu. And so that's kind of the second part, right? So you've got the interfaces, and then you've got the innovators, is what we're calling them. And it's this ability to really push the bounds of what effectively is network addressing, but kind of more tangibly, it's my account in Web3, right? And now I can use it for longer.
And I'm sure you've spoken to a lot of developers in Web3 and told them about Intu, or you've just basically talked about what they're going to be building on Intu. So what are the most common ideas that they come up with when they're thinking, okay, I'm going to try and build this, or I want to build that, and Intu is going to be the way to do it for me?
So, I mean, let's start with the Holy Grail, right? I think what everyone in Web3 is trying to achieve right now is one-click onboarding on mobile with no gas, right? Like, that's it, right? I want people to open up my DApp in browser, right? So you don't have to go through an app store. You don't need to get approvals. It's running in browser on a mobile device. And I can go from 0 to 1 in 1 click. No KYC, no downloading information, no writing down 24 words, right? It's just there. And you're right, as mentioned, in the previous question, there are other people who have come up with ways to achieve that experience or something close to it. But the reality is that it's standing on Web2 infrastructure, which means that you're also inheriting the vulnerabilities and the kind of the fragility of Web2. And so when people come to us and say, "What's Intu?" we start talking about how you can customize things like an onboarding experience. That's really when the light turns on, right? You can see that aha moment, and it's, oh, so this is still non-custodial. If Intu goes away, my product keeps working. My end user has full control of their account, or however much control I determine they need for their account. And you can support me trying to get to this holy grail of one-click or no-click onboarding for a DApp. That aha moment, it's usually is, oh, I didn't know that was possible. I didn't know that this could exist. So I was right in my attempt to imitate, I'm looking backwards at the ways that it's been done before, which is centralized services, APIs, right? Networks that you need to connect to, right? All of that kind of stuff. And so it's really about helping them get there, right? Like what we were talking about earlier. We want to give them the Legos. We want to show them the picture on the front of the box. Maybe have a few examples of other things you can build with these building blocks. But at the end of the day, just empower their creativity to better meet their needs. Right? And then once you're empowering that creativity, that's when we'll really see innovation in user experience, in things like onboarding, in things like customer service, in things like hybrid custody models, right? Imagine being a bank where you don't actually hold your end users' assets. You just help them recover them when they've messed up. That's great, right? You can now push the boundaries of what banking could be. You can help them stake on your behalf, negotiate. All right, there's all these new business models that can come into play. So the forward-looking stuff is super, super exciting. But the first aha moment is typically when we start talking about onboarding.
And it's a highly technical product. It's infrastructure for Web3, and there are a lot of people that are just getting into this sphere, whether that's product managers, founders, and developers as well. What advice would you give them on how to best leverage Intu's customization features for their specific needs?
Great question. 3 ways. The first one, we're just launching our mainnet product. So we are small and we are hungry. If you think you can use Intu, get in touch, right? We will help you through this experience, and we will help you through this experience for as long as we can, right? I'm obviously in a perfect world. I'd say, oh no, we're going to scale so fast that we can't offer that high white glove service. No, for right now, just get in touch. Right? I will help you understand it. We will help you imagine what's possible with it, and we'll absolutely get you from 0 to 1. The average developer with some JavaScript knowledge can do the hello world tutorial for Intu in under 30 minutes. Straightforward. It's super cut and dry, assuming you've worked with things like Ethers.js before. The second bit, right? So that's if you want to, go ahead and just play in the sandbox, have fun. The second bit is if you're trying to build a consumer-facing application, we partner with other tooling, right? You don't have to answer all the questions yourself. We can help you get there. We can help point you in that direction. And we have tutorials and resources dedicated to that. So if you want to inherit the security and the stability of Intu, but you also want the convenience of account abstraction, we can make those introductions for you. We can hold your hand through that process in a way that's very straightforward. And that gap between the core blockchain and the stability of it and the end users suddenly becomes a lot smaller because you're standing on the shoulders of giants, of other infrastructure providers, of other service providers. The third bit is really kind of the ecosystem. And shameless plug here. There is so much opportunity to build Intu enabled protocols that help support additional behavior, like account abstraction, but with an infrastructure kind of lean to it. And if I think that a lot of builders will find when they start working with Intu that yes, their end product for their mainstream user totally viable, but what they've built in the process of getting there, other developers also need. So we also want to support those people, those projects, those builders, and help them build for other people, right? You can now build your own modules standing on Intu and then sell it to other businesses. Right? So there's additional ways for you to monetize and collect value for the work that you've done. Yep.
Sounds too good to be true. Literally being able to do things that you wouldn't be able to do before, and being able to get the hand-holding experience from the Intu team. And I think that's not going to last a long time. That you're going to be having that availability. So the sooner somebody gets onto your radar and starts working with you on deploying into their product, the better for them, because they're going to have the first-hand experience. The time is now, literally. So it's a matter of go to intu.xyz, check out what they've got, reach out, and start building, whether that's on your own or ask for help, because the time could never be better.
Perfect. Awesome.
Thank you for that.